My coworker following me home after work saved me from something I never saw coming. I was unlocking my car in the dimly lit parking garage when I heard footsteps behind me getting closer. My heart jumped into my throat as I spun around, keys clutched between my fingers like a weapon. It was Vanessa from accounting, standing there in her business casual outfit with her purse hanging off one shoulder. She looked nervous, shifting her weight from foot to foot like she was about to deliver bad news. "Lily, I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm crazy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting weird shadows across her face that made her look older than her 30-something years. I'd worked at Henderson Financial for 3 years, and Vanessa had always been friendly but distant, the kind of coworker who made small talk in the break room but never crossed into actual friendship territory. We'd exchange pleasantries about the weather or weekend plans, but I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a real conversation beyond work topics. Now she was standing in the parking garage at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, looking at me like she was about to confess to a crime. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice while mentally calculating how fast I could get into my car and lock the doors if this went sideways. She glanced around the garage like she expected someone to jump out from behind the concrete pillars, then stepped closer and lowered her voice even more. "I followed you home last Tuesday," she said, and my whole body went rigid. "I know how that sounds, but please let me explain before you freak out or call security or whatever you're thinking right now." My mind was racing through every possible explanation for why this woman would admit to stalking me, and none of them were good. I backed up against my car door, keeping my keys ready just in case, and told her she had exactly 1 minute to explain herself before I screamed for help. The parking garage suddenly felt way too empty and isolated, with just our 2 cars sitting there under the buzzing lights. "Your husband picked you up that day, remember? The silver Lexus?" she continued, speaking faster now like she was afraid I'd run before she finished. "I was leaving at the same time and ended up driving behind you guys for a while. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but then I noticed he took a really weird route to get to your neighborhood." I remembered that day vaguely because my car had been in the shop getting new brakes and David had offered to pick me up. He'd been in a good mood, talking about his day at the medical supply company where he worked as a regional sales manager. We'd stopped for Thai food on the way home and everything had seemed perfectly normal. "So what?" I said, still clutching my keys and trying to figure out if I should make a run for the elevator or just get in my car and lock the doors. Maybe he was avoiding traffic or needed to run an errand. "That doesn't explain why you followed us all the way to my house." Vanessa pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something, her hands shaking slightly. "He didn't go to your house though, that's the thing. He drove to this apartment complex about 2 miles from where you actually live. I watched him pull into the parking lot and you both went inside building C. You were in there for about 20 minutes before you came out alone and walked somewhere, and then he drove off in a different direction." The air in the parking garage suddenly felt too thin, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out through a vacuum. I tried to remember last Tuesday evening after dinner and realized I couldn't picture anything clearly beyond David dropping me off at home and saying he needed to run back to the office for a file he forgot. But Vanessa was describing something completely different, something that didn't match my memory at all. "You're wrong," I said, but my voice came out weak and uncertain. "We went straight home after picking up dinner. I was there all evening watching Netflix while he worked on some presentations in his office. You must have followed the wrong car or something." She held up her phone so I could see the screen, and there was a photo of David's silver Lexus with his license plate clearly visible, parked in front of a generic apartment building I'd never seen before. The timestamp showed last Tuesday at 6:15 in the evening, exactly when I thought we'd been heading home. My stomach dropped like I'd just gone over a cliff in a car with no brakes. "I took more pictures," Vanessa said quietly, swiping to the next image. "This one shows you getting out of the passenger side, and this one is about 15 minutes later when you came back out and started walking down the street. You looked really confused, like you didn't know where you were." I stared at the photos in complete disbelief because the woman in the pictures was definitely me, wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to work that day. But I had absolutely no memory of being at that apartment complex or walking around some random neighborhood looking lost. The last thing I clearly remembered was eating pad thai in our kitchen while David complained about a difficult client. "This doesn't make any sense," I whispered, feeling like the concrete floor was tilting under my feet. "Why would he take me to an apartment and then leave me there? And why can't I remember any of this?" Vanessa's face went from nervous to deeply concerned, and she put her phone away before speaking again. "Lily, I'm going to ask you something really personal, and I need you to be honest with yourself about the answer. Do you ever wake up feeling really groggy or have gaps in your memory, like whole chunks of time you can't account for?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest because the answer was yes, but I'd always blamed it on stress and my terrible sleep schedule. There were mornings when I'd wake up exhausted even after supposedly sleeping for 8 hours, and evenings that seemed to disappear entirely. Just last week, I'd somehow lost 3 hours between getting home from work and eating dinner, but David had explained that I'd taken a nap on the couch and just didn't remember. "Sometimes," I admitted, hugging my purse against my chest like it could protect me from whatever Vanessa was about to say next. "But that's normal, right? Everyone has fuzzy memories sometimes, especially when they're tired or stressed from work." She shook her head slowly, and I could see genuine fear in her eyes now. "Not like this. Not where you're in completely different locations with no memory of how you got there. Lily, I think your husband might be drugging you. I think he's been doing it for a while, and I think something really bad is happening during those gaps you can't remember." The words hung in the air between us like poison gas, and I felt my whole body start to shake. Part of me wanted to scream that she was insane and making up horrible lies about my husband, who I'd been married to for 5 years. David was successful and charming, and everyone at his company loved him. He brought me coffee in bed on weekends and remembered my mom's birthday and planned romantic surprises for our anniversary. He couldn't possibly be the monster Vanessa was describing. But another part of me, a small voice I'd been ignoring for months, whispered that maybe this explained why I'd been feeling so strange lately. The missing time, the exhaustion, the weird gaps in my memory that David always had convenient explanations for. The way I'd wake up sometimes with bruises I couldn't explain, or soreness in my muscles like I'd been exercising when I knew I'd been home all evening. I know this is overwhelming, Vanessa continued, reaching out like she wanted to touch my arm but stopping herself. But I need you to think about whether there have been other times when things didn't add up. Times when David told you one thing happened, but you had this feeling that something else was going on. I leaned back against my car and tried to breathe normally while my brain went through months of memories looking for inconsistencies. There was the weekend trip to the mountains he'd planned where I'd supposedly gotten food poisoning and slept through most of Saturday, waking up in the hotel room with no memory of the day. The dinner party at his boss's house where everyone kept commenting on how quiet I was being, even though I had no recollection of being there at all. The anniversary celebration at an expensive restaurant that existed only in the photos on David's phone, because I couldn't remember a single moment of that evening. Oh my God, I breathed out, sliding down the side of my car until I was sitting on the cold concrete floor. How long has this been happening? How many times has he done this to me? Vanessa crouched down next to me, keeping her distance but staying close enough to help if I needed it. I don't know, but we need to figure out what's really going on and get you somewhere safe. Do you have family nearby or friends you could stay with tonight? Someone David doesn't know about? My mind immediately went to my older sister Paige, who lived across town with her husband and 2 kids. We'd been close growing up but had drifted apart after I married David, partly because he always had some excuse for why we couldn't make it to family dinners or birthday parties. Looking back now with fresh eyes, I realized he'd been systematically isolating me from everyone I was close to, always with reasonable-sounding explanations that I'd accepted without question. My sister, I said, pulling out my phone with trembling hands, but I need proof before I go to her with this story. She never really liked David, and if I show up saying he's been drugging me without any evidence, she'll think I'm having some kind of breakdown. Vanessa stood up and held out her hand to help me off the ground. I have those photos from Tuesday, and I'm willing to testify about what I saw. But you're right that we need more concrete evidence, especially if you want to go to the police or file for a restraining order. Do you think you could check his car or his office at home for whatever he's been using? The thought of going back to the house I shared with David made my skin crawl, but I knew Vanessa was right. If he was really drugging me, there had to be physical evidence somewhere. Pills or powder or syringes, something he was using to make me lose time and memory. I thought about his home office that he always kept locked, claiming it was to protect confidential work documents, and his car that he detailed obsessively every weekend, never letting me touch anything inside or even ride along when he went to the car wash. He's supposed to be working late tonight, I said slowly, trying to remember his schedule. Some client dinner that's supposed to run until at least 9 or 10. If I go home now, I'd have maybe 2 hours to search before he gets back. Vanessa pulled her car keys out and jingled them nervously. I'll come with you. You shouldn't do this alone. And if he comes home early, it's better to have a witness. Plus, I can take pictures of anything we find so there's documentation. We drove separately to my house in the suburbs, and I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole way to make sure no silver Lexus was following us. The street was quiet when we pulled up, with most of my neighbors still at work or hidden inside their houses for the evening. I'd always loved this neighborhood with its mature trees and well-maintained lawns, but now it felt like a stage set designed to hide something sinister. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the front door lock, and Vanessa had to steady my wrist so I could turn it. The house was dark and silent when we stepped inside, smelling faintly of the lavender air freshener David liked to use. Everything looked exactly the way I'd left it that morning, with my coffee mug still sitting in the sink and a magazine open on the couch from last night. But now, knowing what I knew, the whole space felt contaminated, like every surface was hiding secrets I didn't want to discover. Where should we start? Vanessa asked, keeping her voice low even though we were alone. She stayed close to the front door like she was ready to run if needed, and I didn't blame her one bit for being cautious. We started in the kitchen, going through every cabinet and drawer looking for anything that didn't belong. I found the usual medications in the bathroom cabinet upstairs, aspirin and cold medicine and my birth control pills that I took religiously every morning. But then Vanessa picked up the bottle of vitamins David had bought me last month, saying they'd help with my constant exhaustion. She opened it and dumped a few pills into her palm, examining them under the bathroom light. These don't look right, she said, holding one up so I could see. Vitamins are usually a single color all the way through, but these have this weird two-tone thing going on. See how the capsule is slightly separated in the middle, like someone opened it and put it back together? I took the pill from her and looked closer, realizing she was absolutely right. The gelatin capsule had a faint line around the middle where it had been pulled apart and reassembled, and when I held it up to the light, I could see different colored powders inside instead of the uniform vitamin blend that should be there. My stomach turned over as I thought about how I'd been taking these every single morning with breakfast, David handing them to me with orange juice and a smile. He's been putting something in my vitamins, I said, my voice coming out flat and distant like I was talking about someone else's life. Every single day for at least a month, maybe longer if he was doing this with previous bottles too. That's why I've been so tired and foggy all the time. Vanessa carefully placed the pills back in the bottle and sealed it, then took several photos with her phone from different angles. We need to get these tested by a lab, but first let's see what else we can find. If he's been this calculated about the vitamins, there's probably other stuff hidden around the house. We moved to David's home office next, and I had to use the emergency key I'd hidden in a kitchen drawer for the locked door. The office was exactly as I'd seen it 1,000 times before, with his big desk and expensive computer setup and shelves full of medical supply catalogs and sales awards. But Vanessa went straight to the filing cabinet in the corner and started pulling open drawers while I stood there feeling paralyzed by the violation of going through my husband's private space. "Lily, you need to see this," she said after a few minutes, holding up a file folder that had been hidden at the very back of the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of printed photographs of me in that same apartment complex from the pictures she'd taken, but these spanned months instead of just one day. There was me getting out of David's car wearing different outfits from different seasons, me standing in the parking lot looking confused, me walking down the street in various directions like I was searching for something. In every single photo, I looked disoriented and lost, like I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there. "What the hell has he been doing to me?" I whispered, flipping through the photos with growing horror. Some of them showed me talking to people I didn't recognize, and others captured me just standing still in the middle of the parking lot like a broken robot. The dates written on the back went back almost 2 years, which meant this had been going on for much longer than I'd realized. Vanessa pulled out more files, and each one made the situation worse. There were medical records I'd never seen before, showing visits to doctors I'd never heard of and prescriptions for medications I didn't remember taking, consent forms with my signature for procedures I had no memory of undergoing, insurance claims for treatments that never happened, or at least not that I could recall. Everything was in my name, using my information, but none of it felt real or connected to my actual life. "He's been taking you to that apartment and doing something to you while you're drugged," Vanessa said, her voice shaking now. "And he's been documenting everything like it's some kind of sick experiment. We need to call the police right now, Lily. This is way beyond what we can handle on our own." I was about to agree when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway outside. We both froze, listening to the engine shut off and a car door slam. Heavy footsteps crunched up the walkway toward the front door, and I felt ice water flood my veins when I recognized David's walk. He was home 2 hours early, and we were trapped in his office surrounded by evidence of his crimes. Vanessa grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the closet in the corner of the office, shoving me inside and cramming in next to me. We left the filing cabinet drawer open and papers scattered across the desk in our panic, but there was no time to clean up. I heard David's key turn in the front door lock and his cheerful voice calling out my name like this was just another normal evening. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it through the walls. "Lily? Honey, are you home? I brought dinner from that Italian place you love." His footsteps moved through the downstairs, and I heard him set something down on the kitchen counter. "Your car's in the driveway, so I know you're here somewhere. Playing hide and seek?" There was something off about his tone, a forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Vanessa's fingers dug into my arm as we listened to him climb the stairs and walk down the hallway. I could see a thin strip of light under the closet door, and I watched his shadow pass by the office before stopping. The door handle jiggled, and I realized with sinking horror that we'd left it unlocked after opening it with the emergency key. "That's interesting," David said, his voice right outside now. "I'm absolutely certain I locked this before I left this morning, and it's definitely unlocked now, which means someone's been in here." He pushed the door open, and I heard him step into the office. There was a long silence where I imagined him seeing the open filing cabinet and scattered papers, putting together what had happened. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely, dropping the friendly husband act and turning cold as winter. "Lily, I know you're in here somewhere. I can see you've been going through my things, which is really disappointing. We're going to need to have a serious conversation about boundaries and trust." Vanessa's hand found mine in the darkness of the closet, and she squeezed it hard. I could feel her whole body trembling against mine, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. If he opened this closet door, we'd be cornered with no way out. The office window was too high up to jump from safely, and he was blocking the only door. "I'm going to count to 3, David continued, his footsteps moving around the office slowly. "And then I'm going to open every door and look in every space until I find you. 1. I heard a drawer open and close, then the sound of something heavy being picked up. 2. His footsteps stopped right in front of the closet door, and I saw the shadow of his feet in the strip of light at the bottom. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. Vanessa did the same next to me, both of us frozen like prey animals hoping the predator would pass us by. 3, David said, and I watched the door handle start to turn. But before he could open it, a loud crash came from downstairs, like something heavy had fallen over. David's footsteps immediately moved away from the closet and out of the office, heading toward the stairs. "Who else is in my house?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. As soon as I heard him reach the bottom of the stairs, Vanessa grabbed my hand and we burst out of the closet. She pulled me toward the office door, but I stopped and grabbed the folder with all the photos, shoving it under my arm. We ran down the hallway in the opposite direction from the stairs, heading toward the guest bedroom that had a small balcony off the back. I could hear David searching downstairs, opening doors and cursing, and knew we only had seconds before he realized the noise was a distraction and came back up looking for us. Vanessa got the guest bedroom door closed behind us and locked it, then rushed to the balcony door. The drop to the backyard looked terrifying from up here, at least 12 feet down onto the grass. But she didn't hesitate, climbing over the railing and hanging by her hands before letting go. She hit the ground hard and rolled, then looked up at me and gestured frantically for me to follow. I heard David's footsteps thundering up the stairs and knew I was out of time. I clutched the folder against my chest and climbed over the railing, my arms shaking with fear and adrenaline. Below me, Vanessa was positioned to try to catch me or at least break my fall. Behind me, someone started pounding on the guest bedroom door, and I heard David screaming my name with rage I'd never heard from him before. I let go and fell through the air for what felt like an eternity. I hit the ground wrong and felt something twist painfully in my ankle, but Vanessa was already pulling me up and dragging me toward the back fence. I limped along as fast as I could while David's voice echoed from the balcony above us, shouting threats about what would happen when he caught me. We made it through the back gate and into the alley behind my house, where Vanessa's car was parked with the engine still running. She'd planned this escape route, I realized. She'd left her car in the alley instead of the driveway because she knew we might need to run. We threw ourselves into her car and she peeled out, driving way too fast through residential streets, while I looked back to see if David was following us. His silver Lexus appeared at the end of the block just as we turned the corner, and I watched him speed up to try to catch us. Vanessa ran a red light and took random turns, clearly trying to lose him in the maze of suburban streets. My ankle was throbbing and I was pretty sure I'd twisted it badly in the fall, but all I could think about was the folder of photos in my lap and what they meant. David had been systematically drugging me and taking me to some unknown location for almost 2 years. The question was why, and what had he been doing to me during those missing hours? "Where are we going?" I asked as Vanessa merged onto the highway, still checking her mirrors constantly for any sign of the silver Lexus. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I felt like I might throw up from the combination of fear and pain in my ankle. She glanced over at me before focusing back on the road. "Police station downtown. We're going to walk in there with all this evidence and file a report for assault, drugging, and whatever other charges apply. And then we're getting you somewhere safe where he can't find you." I nodded and pulled out my phone to call my sister Paige, but stopped when I saw 15 missed calls from David in just the last 10 minutes. There were also a series of text messages that started out loving and concerned, but quickly devolved into angry threats. The last one, sent just 2 minutes ago, said he knew where Paige lived and suggested I think very carefully about where I went next. "He's threatening my sister," I said, showing Vanessa the phone screen. "He knows I'd go to her for help, and he's already planning to look for me there. I can't put her and her family in danger because of this." Vanessa took the next exit and pulled into a gas station, parking under the bright lights where we'd be visible to anyone around. She turned to face me with an expression of grim determination that reminded me why I'd always respected her quiet competence at work. "Then we go to the police first, get everything documented, and they can send officers to protect your sister. But Lily, you need to understand something important. This isn't just about drugging you and taking you places. Those medical records and consent forms we saw suggest he's been doing something much worse." My stomach clenched as I thought about those papers with my signature, authorizing treatments and procedures I had no memory of agreeing to. The insurance claims for hospital visits that never happened, or at least not in any version of reality I could remember. David worked for a medical supply company with access to drugs and equipment and connections throughout the healthcare system. What if he'd been using those resources to do something unspeakable? "What do you think he was doing?" I whispered, not sure I wanted to hear the answer but needing to know anyway. Vanessa pulled out her phone and showed me something she'd photographed in David's office while I was looking at the pictures. It was a medical journal article about experimental drug trials and the use of memory-suppressing medications to prevent patients from forming traumatic memories during procedures. The margins were covered in David's handwriting, notes about dosages and timing and effectiveness. "I think he's been using you as a test subject," she said quietly. "Running experiments or trials or something, wiping your memory afterwards so you wouldn't know what happened. Those consent forms were probably forged or signed while you were under the influence, giving him legal cover for whatever he was doing." The implications of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow, and I doubled over in the passenger seat, gasping for air. My husband, the man I'd loved and trusted for 5 years, had been systematically violating my body and mind for his own purposes, using me like a laboratory animal while maintaining the facade of a normal marriage. Every kind word, every romantic gesture, every moment of seeming affection had been a lie designed to keep me compliant and unsuspecting. "I'm going to be sick," I managed to say before opening the car door and throwing up onto the gas station pavement. Vanessa got out and came around to hold my hair back, rubbing my back while I emptied my stomach. When I was done, she handed me a bottle of water from her car and helped me sit back in the passenger seat. "We're going to get through this," she said firmly, crouching down so she was at eye level with me. "You're not alone anymore, Lily. I saw what was happening and I followed you because I couldn't just ignore it. And now we're going to make sure he faces consequences for everything he's done." I wiped my mouth and looked at this woman who I'd barely known beyond casual workplace interaction, who had risked her own safety to help me. "Why did you follow us that day?" I asked. "What made you think something was wrong?" Vanessa stood up and leaned against the car, staring out at the traffic on the highway. "My older sister was in an abusive marriage for years. Her husband never hit her where anyone could see, and he was so charming that everyone thought she was lucky to have him. But I noticed little things, inconsistencies in her stories and gaps in her memory. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd isolated her completely from everyone who might help her." She turned back to look at me with tears in her eyes. "She didn't make it out, Lily. He killed her during one of his episodes and made it look like an accident. I've spent the last 6 years wondering if I could have saved her if I'd just paid more attention or been braver about intervening. When I saw those same warning signs with you, the isolation and the memory gaps and the controlling behavior, I couldn't let it happen again." I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it hard. "I'm so sorry about your sister. And thank you for being brave enough to get involved this time, even though it put you at risk. You saved my life tonight." We sat there for a few more minutes, gathering our strength before driving to the police station. Vanessa called ahead to let them know we were coming in with evidence of a serious crime, and they promised to have detectives ready to take our statements. My phone kept buzzing with more calls and messages from David, each one more desperate and threatening than the last. We pulled into the police station parking lot just after 8 o'clock at night, and I limped through the front doors leaning on Vanessa for support. The intake officer took one look at us, disheveled and scared and carrying folders full of evidence, and immediately called for the detectives on duty. Within minutes, we were sitting in an interview room with Detective Rachel Washington, a woman in her 40s who specialized in domestic violence and assault cases. I spread out all the photos and documents on the table between us, while Vanessa showed her the pictures she'd taken of David's car at the apartment complex. Detective Washington listened carefully to our story, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. When I got to the part about the doctored vitamins and the medical records, her expression darkened and she called in another detective who specialized in medical fraud. "This is one of the most elaborate cases I've seen," Detective Washington said after examining all the evidence. "But you've done an excellent job of documenting everything. And with Ms. Hayes' eyewitness testimony, we have a strong foundation for prosecution. I'm going to need you to give us the full address of that apartment complex so we can send officers to investigate." I gave them my home address and described the apartment building from Vanessa's photos, though I still had no actual memory of being there. Detective Washington made some calls, and within 30 minutes, she had a team headed to both locations. She explained they'd need to get a warrant for David's office and car, but the evidence we'd already gathered gave them probable cause. "What happens to me now?" I asked, my voice small and scared. "He knows where my sister lives, where I work, where all my friends are. How am I supposed to stay safe while you build a case against him?" The detective pulled out some pamphlets about witness protection and domestic violence safe houses. "We have several options, depending on how threatened you feel. Given the sophistication of what he's been doing and his access to medical resources, I'd recommend our highest security location at least until we have him in custody. It's not permanent, but it will keep you safe while we investigate." Vanessa spoke up then, surprising both me and the detective. "She can stay with me. I live in a secure building with doormen and cameras, and David doesn't know where I live since we're not close at work. Plus, I work from home most days, so she wouldn't be alone." Detective Washington looked skeptical, but I felt a wave of gratitude toward Vanessa that almost brought me to tears. The idea of going to some anonymous safe house full of strangers felt overwhelming, but staying with someone I knew, even if we weren't close friends yet, seemed manageable. "Are you sure?" I asked Vanessa. "This could get dangerous if he figures out I'm with you. He's clearly capable of much worse things than I ever imagined." She nodded without hesitation. "I'm sure. Besides, I've got a baseball bat and excellent aim. And now that the police know what's going on, he'd be stupid to try anything that would make his situation worse." We spent the next 3 hours at the police station, giving detailed statements and answering what felt like hundreds of questions. Detective Washington arranged for the vitamins to be sent to a lab for analysis, and she personally photographed every piece of evidence we'd brought from David's office. Around 11 o'clock, she finally said we could go, but made me promise to check in twice a day and report any contact from David immediately. Vanessa drove us to her apartment building across town, and I saw what she meant about security. There was a doorman who checked IDs and a keycard system for the elevator. Her apartment was on the 14th floor with a nice view of the city, and she showed me to her guest room like this was the most normal thing in the world. I collapsed onto the bed, my injured ankle throbbing and my mind reeling from everything that had happened in the last 4 hours. Vanessa brought me ice for the swelling and some pain medication, then sat on the edge of the bed. "Try to get some sleep," she said gently. "Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But tonight you're safe, I promise." I wanted to ask her so many questions about why she was doing this, and what would happen next, and whether the police would actually be able to stop David. But exhaustion crashed over me like a wave, and I fell asleep still fully clothed with the ice pack on my ankle. I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand next to me, and groggily reached for it before remembering where I was. The screen showed another incoming call from David, and I dropped it like it had burned me. Vanessa appeared in the doorway holding coffee, and she gently took the phone from my hands. "Don't answer him," she said firmly. "The police said not to have any contact until they've made an arrest. He's trying to manipulate you into coming back or at least revealing where you are." I nodded and accepted the coffee, wrapping both hands around the warm mug. Morning light streamed through the guest room window, and I could hear traffic sounds from the street below. Everything looked so normal and peaceful, like the nightmare of last night couldn't possibly be real. But then I shifted position and pain shot through my ankle, reminding me that it had definitely happened. "Detective Washington called about 20 minutes ago," Vanessa said, sitting down in the chair by the window. "They executed search warrants on your house and David's car early this morning. They found a lot of evidence and they're building a case for multiple felony charges including assault, unlawful imprisonment, and administering drugs without consent." I set down my coffee before I dropped it, my hands shaking too badly to hold anything. "Did they arrest him? Is he in jail right now?" Vanessa's expression told me the answer before she spoke. "He wasn't at the house when they arrived and his car isn't at his workplace. They've issued a warrant for his arrest and put out an alert, but right now they don't know where he is. Detective Washington wants you to stay here and lay low until they locate him." The fear that had briefly subsided came roaring back, and I looked toward the window like David might suddenly appear outside even though we were 14 floors up. If he knew the police were after him, he was probably desperate and capable of anything, and he was smart enough to evade them for at least a little while, especially with his medical connections and resources. "What if he figures out I'm here?" I whispered, pulling my knees up to my chest. "What if he's watching Vanessa's building or following her from work?" Vanessa stood up and closed the curtains, blocking the view both ways. "The building security knows to watch for him. I gave them his photo and description, and they'll call the police immediately if he shows up. You're as safe here as you can be anywhere right now." We spent that first day just existing in her apartment, too scared to go outside or do anything that might reveal our location. Vanessa worked from her laptop at the kitchen table while I sat on the couch staring at nothing, trying to process everything I'd learned. My entire marriage had been a lie, built on manipulation and drugs and violations I couldn't even fully remember. How many times had David taken me to that apartment? What had he done to me during those lost hours? The questions spun through my mind on an endless loop, each one worse than the last. Detective Washington called again that afternoon with an update. "We found the apartment he'd been taking you to," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It's a medical office space he'd been renting under a false name. There's examination equipment inside and a locked file cabinet full of documentation. We're working on breaking into it now, but from what we can see, he's been conducting unauthorized drug trials using you as the test subject." I closed my eyes and felt tears slip down my cheeks. What kind of drugs? We're still analyzing everything, but it appears to be experimental medications related to memory suppression and cognitive function. Some of them aren't even approved for human trials yet. He's been documenting your responses and side effects in detailed logs that go back almost 2 years. 2 years of my life, stolen and violated while I smiled and played the role of happy wife. 2 years of missing time and gaps in memory that I dismissed as stress or exhaustion. I'd been walking around as a puppet while David pulled the strings, and I'd never even known it. "There's something else you should know," Detective Washington continued carefully. "We found evidence that he was preparing to expand his operation. He'd been researching other potential subjects and keeping files on several women, including some of your coworkers at Henderson Financial. You weren't going to be his only victim for much longer." The thought of David doing this to other women made my stomach turn, but it also hardened something inside me. I couldn't just hide in Vanessa's apartment feeling sorry for myself while he was out there planning to hurt more people. I needed to be brave enough to help the police catch him and make sure he faced consequences for everything he'd done. "What do you need from me?" I asked, sitting up straighter on the couch. "How can I help you find him and build the strongest possible case?" I could hear the detective's approval through the phone. "Right now, the best thing you can do is stay safe and be ready to testify when we catch him. But if you can remember anything about the apartment or the procedures he might have done, any detail at all, that would help us understand the full scope of his crimes." I spent the next few hours with Vanessa's laptop, typing out every memory gap and unexplained incident I could think of from the past 2 years. The weekend I'd supposedly spent sick in bed while David claimed I was too out of it to remember anything. The dinner parties where everyone said I'd been there, but I had no recollection of the conversations. The random bruises and soreness that David always explained away with mundane reasons. Each memory I documented made the picture clearer and more horrifying. 3 days passed with David still at large, and I started to go stir crazy in Vanessa's apartment despite her best efforts to keep me distracted. We watched movies and played cards and talked about everything except the obvious topic hanging over us. She told me more about her sister and the warning signs she'd missed, and I shared stories about my marriage that I could now see were full of red flags I'd ignored. On the 4th morning, I woke up to urgent knocking on Vanessa's front door. We both froze, and I watched her grab the baseball bat she'd been keeping by her bed before creeping to look through the peephole. But instead of David, it was Detective Washington standing in the hallway with another officer. Vanessa let them in quickly, and I could tell immediately from their faces that something significant had happened. "We got him," Detective Washington said without preamble. "He was hiding out at his brother's cabin upstate, and we arrested him about 2 hours ago. He's in custody now, and bail is being set extremely high given the flight risk and severity of charges." The relief that flooded through me was so intense. I actually felt dizzy, and I had to sit down on the couch before my legs gave out. David was in custody. He couldn't hurt me anymore or conduct his sick experiments on anyone else. After almost a week of living in constant fear, I could finally breathe again. "There's more," the detective continued, sitting down across from me. "When we arrested him, he had a go-bag packed with fake IDs, cash, and detailed files on 4 other women he'd been targeting. One of them was your coworker, Vanessa." We both turned to look at Vanessa, who'd gone completely pale and lowered the baseball bat to the floor. "Me?" she whispered. "He was targeting me?" Detective Washington nodded grimly. "We found surveillance photos of you leaving work, detailed notes about your schedule and habits, and research into your medical history. Our best guess is that you intervened with Lily before he could move forward with his plans for you, but he was definitely setting up to make you his next victim." The room went silent as we all processed what that meant. Vanessa hadn't just saved me when she followed David's car that day. She'd saved herself too, without even knowing it. If she'd minded her own business and ignored the warning signs, she might have ended up in that apartment office being used for experiments just like I had been. "I need to sit down," Vanessa said, even though she was already sitting. She looked at me with wide eyes, and I reached over to take her hand. We'd both been in David's crosshairs, but we'd gotten out. We'd survived and helped catch him before he could hurt anyone else. "What happens next?" I asked Detective Washington, still holding onto Vanessa's hand like a lifeline. "Trial preparation," she replied. "The district attorney is building a case for multiple felony charges including aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, practicing medicine without a license, administering controlled substances without consent, and fraud. With all the evidence we've gathered and both of your testimonies, they're confident about getting a conviction." The trial took almost 8 months to prepare, and during that time I slowly started rebuilding my life. I moved out of Vanessa's guest room and into my own apartment, one that David had never been to and couldn't find. I started therapy 3 times a week to process the trauma and work through the violation of having years of my life stolen. Vanessa became not just my coworker but my closest friend, the person who'd seen me at my lowest and helped me climb back up. The prosecution brought mountains of evidence including the doctored vitamins, the medical records, the surveillance photos, and detailed logs David had kept of his experiments on me. Expert witnesses testified about the dangerous and unapproved drugs he'd been using and the serious risks they posed. Other victims came forward too, women who'd dated David before me and had similar experiences with memory gaps and missing time. The defense tried to paint David as a dedicated medical researcher pushing the boundaries of science, but the jury saw through it immediately. After less than 6 hours of deliberation, they came back with guilty verdicts on all major charges. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 15 years. When they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, David looked at me one last time with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was remorse, or maybe just anger at getting caught. Either way, I stared back without flinching until the bailiff took him through the door and out of my life forever. Standing on the courthouse steps afterward with Vanessa beside me and my sister on my other side, I felt something shift inside my chest. The weight I'd been carrying for months started to lift, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. I'd been David's victim and his test subject and his puppet for 2 years, but I'd survived. More than that, I'd fought back and won. "What are you going to do now?" Paige asked, putting her arm around my shoulders. I looked at Vanessa, who smiled and nodded like she already knew what I was going to say. "I'm going to help other women recognize the warning signs, work with domestic violence organizations to teach people what to look for when someone's being systematically abused and manipulated, make sure David's crimes don't just disappear into the prison system without changing anything." "We're going to help," Vanessa corrected, taking my other hand. "I'm not letting you do this alone. We started this together when I followed you home that night, and we're going to finish it together too." 6 months after the trial, Vanessa and I launched a nonprofit organization focused on identifying and preventing covert abuse in relationships. We spoke at colleges and corporations and community centers, teaching people about the subtle signs of drugging and manipulation. We worked with lawmakers to create stricter penalties for administering substances without consent and to require better monitoring of medical supplies. The apartment building where David had conducted his experiments was torn down, and a memorial garden was planted in its place for victims of medical abuse. I went to the dedication ceremony and planted flowers while reporters asked me questions about my experience. It was hard talking about it publicly, but I knew my story could help protect others from going through the same thing. Sometimes I still have nightmares about those missing hours and wonder exactly what David did to me during the time I can't remember. My therapist says I may never recover those memories completely, and that might be a blessing in disguise. But I've learned to live with the gaps and focus on the life I'm building now instead of the one that was stolen from me. Vanessa and I have coffee every Tuesday morning before work, a ritual we started during those early days when I was staying in her guest room. We talk about everything from serious advocacy work to completely mundane complaints about traffic and weather. She's become the sister I chose for myself, the person who saw me in danger and decided to act instead of looking away. On the anniversary of the night she followed me home, I bought Vanessa a gift. It was a compass necklace with an inscription on the back that said, "For having the courage to follow your instincts." She cried when she opened it, and we spent the evening looking through everything we'd accomplished in the year since David's arrest, the lives we'd potentially saved by speaking out, and the changes we'd helped create in how the legal system handled covert abuse cases. "I still can't believe how close we came to both being his victims," Vanessa said, touching the compass pendant. "If I'd just minded my own business that day or talked myself out of following you, everything would be different." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "But you didn't. You saw something wrong and you trusted that instinct even though it was scary and weird and uncomfortable. You saved both of us, and now we're saving others. That's what matters." Looking back at everything that happened, I realized the scariest part wasn't the drugs, or the missing memories, or even David's crimes themselves. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.